So about 20 years ago, a movie called The Village came out. It focused on a small village in the middle of nowhere, no electricity or running water, no machines or technology. The villagers speak sort of an outdated, older English, and their clothes look like something from a few hundred years ago. It's a very peaceful life in this village as long as you stay within the confines of the village and don't venture out because there are monsters in the woods. Everything's going fine until one day someone's attacked inside the village. No one's quite sure what happened. Eventually we find out there are no creatures, no monsters in the woods. They are a creation, a fiction designed to keep people from leaving the village. That the attacker is not some beast outside the village, it's actually a person who lives inside the village. When the movie comes to a climax, and yes, I'm going to spoil it for you, but it's 20-something years old. They have to send someone away from the village to get some medicine, and in doing that, we discover that this whole story does not take place 200 years ago. It's actually taking place right now. That this village is not something from the past, it's something current. What had happened was the leaders of the village had had some traumatic experience in their lives, so they created this village that was away from everything, separated from everything, cut off from outside influences. And their whole purpose, their whole goal of this village was to keep the evil outside. But it doesn't work because they brought the evil inside with them. It's a fascinating story because it exposes a lie that we often believe. We often think, I think this too, that if all of our circumstances lined up perfectly, our problems would go away. Like we think the biggest problems we face are outside of us, not inside of us. Have you ever found yourself thinking that what you desperately need is a vacation, and that if you took it, everything would be okay? So was it? So did that vacation you took that you'd waited for so long, did it relieve all of your stress? Did it dispel every anxiety? If you took your family, maybe that was a good decision, maybe not. Was it? Like, was everyone happy the whole time? Was everyone content? I remember being a teenager and thinking, once I get my driver's license, everything's going to be so much better. And I had not learned about the cost of gas and insurance and car repair on old vehicles. I think nowadays the version of that is a smartphone. Once you get your smartphone. I once heard one of my sons say that if they could have a certain Christmas present, they would never ask for anything ever again. Really, Dad, I'm serious. Liars. Or sports team who says, if we'll just win the championship this year, I will never complain about the coach. How long does that last? An engaged couple who says, once we're married, life will be perfect. New parents in the hospital who look in their newborn's eyes and they say, I could never be angry with this child. So we keep telling ourselves that all we need to be happy, content, calm, peaceful, relaxed, joyful, fill in the emotion, is if our circumstances change. Now, to be fair, circumstances matter, and sometimes changing your circumstances can be helpful and wise. But changing our circumstances doesn't ultimately solve what plagues us. If you place your hope in changing circumstances, you will be disappointed. Our passage this morning teaches us to hope in God's promises, not changing circumstances. Let's just think about where we are in our story. Noah has just stepped off the ark. He and his family, they're going to begin this process of being fruitful and multiplying and filling the earth. God has washed humanity's wickedness from the planet. Everything should be perfect, right? Well, it's not. What we see, in fact, is instant failure. And this failure teaches about the folly of hoping in the wrong things. So here's the first lesson we see this morning, is don't put your hope in changing circumstances. Don't put your hope in changing circumstances. So déjà vu is French for already seen. And it describes that experience we have where something's happening and we're like, this seems like it's already happened. Somebody described déjà vu as remembering the future. If you're a Matrix fan, you know it's a glitch in the Matrix. Charles Dickens wrote this. He said, we all have some experience of a feeling that comes over us occasionally of what we are saying and doing having been said and done before in a remote time, of our having been surrounded dim ages ago by the same faces, objects, and circumstances, of our knowing perfectly what will be said next, as if we suddenly remember it. Well, if you've been paying attention during our study of Genesis, you should feel some deja vu right now, because the story of Noah mirrors the story of Adam in so many ways. They both stand at the head of the human race. You have Adam at creation and Noah after the flood. God brings animals 2 by 2, male and female, each according to their kind, both to Adam and then to Noah. Both receive a very specific command from the Lord, and the consequence for violating that command is death. God provides food for both of them to eat. Both have 3 sons listed by name. And sadly, both sin in the same way. Look at verse 20. Noah was a man of the soil, began by planting a vineyard. He drank some of the wine, became drunk, and uncovered himself inside his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father naked and told his 2 brothers outside. Then Shem and Japheth took a cloak and placed it over both their shoulders, and walking backward, they covered their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father naked. Chapter 2, God planted a garden. Here Noah plants a vineyard. In that garden, Adam sins by eating something grown in the garden. Noah sins by drinking something grown in the garden. Adam responds by knowing he is naked. Noah responds by getting naked. God covers Noah's nakedness with animal skins to hide his shame. Noah's sons cover his nakedness and turn their faces away from his shame. Following Adam's sins, one of his sons sins against a family member and is cursed. Following Noah's sins, one of his sons sins against a family member and is cursed. Deja vu. Right? We're not supposed to miss the fact that Noah's story plays out exactly the same way as Adam's did. Why is it important that we notice these similarities? When we see both Adam and Noah sin, in spite of living in ideal circumstances, it should cause us to stop and think, would I have done better? If my circumstances were perfect, would I behave perfectly? And the answer is no. You don't sin because of your circumstances, and so the key to victory is not found through a better arrangement of all of the details in your life. Changing circumstances don't change the heart. If a greedy man wins the lottery, he's not content. If a proud man is inducted into the Hall of Fame, he's not humble. Changing circumstances do not change the heart. This is very clear in Noah's story. A renewed world does not mean a renewed heart. Let me point out 3 reasons here from Noah's life not to put all of your hope in changing circumstances. So here's the first one. First reason you shouldn't do this is because no matter your circumstances, we still misuse God's creation. We still misuse God's creation. God creates this world and He gives it to us to help us rejoice in Him. So in Noah's circumstance, you have wine. Wine comes as grapes ferment. This is a process designed by God. And when enjoyed as God intends, wine can be received with gratitude. Like all of those guests, when Jesus turned water into wine at a wedding, they received it with gratitude. But instead of using wine to rejoice in God, to celebrate God's goodness and His grace and His kindness to us, what does Noah do? Noah uses it to replace God, just like Adam did. We do this all the time. We take what God gives us as a way of rejoicing in Him, and we use it to replace with Him. And alcohol is a great example. So when things get hard and you're not sure where to turn, where should you turn? Well, you should turn to God. But where do people turn? Well, one of the places they turn is to alcohol. Right now, the Bible doesn't condemn the use of alcohol, but it does condemn drunkenness. Think about why it condemns drunkenness. What happens when someone gets drunk? We're told instead of being controlled by God, they drink this thing and they'll be controlled by that thing they drink. So they're quite literally replacing God with what God has made. The Bible calls this idolatry. It's a battle we fight every day. And here's what makes it especially difficult, is we don't replace God with bad things. We replace God with good things. So the issue here isn't wine, it's how Noah replaces God, how he uses it in place of God. Tim Keller wrote a book called Counterfeit Gods where he discusses this issue of idolatry. And he makes this really important point. He says, we know a good thing has become a counterfeit god or an idol when its demands on you exceed proper boundaries. So he gives a couple examples. If you make an idol of a work, and you may work until you ruin your health, or you may break the laws in order to get ahead. If you make an idol of love, you may turn a blind eye to all of sort of the evil in your relationship, or you may allow someone to exploit or abuse you. An idolatrous attachment can lead you to break any promise, rationalize any indiscretion, or betray any other allegiance in order to hold on to it. It may drive you to violate all good and proper boundaries. See, that's what Noah does. That's what we do too. We replace God with the things God gives us. We take the good things he provides for us. So in this case, Noah and Adam, it's fruit. And we violate those proper boundaries he set up. So we prefer the created things over the Creator. I want you to maybe picture it this way. I want you to imagine a mom and dad who they decide they want to take their kids to Disney World, and it's expensive, so they spend all year. They're saving money. They're sacrificing different things just so they can make it happen. And the day finally comes, and so they go there. They enter the park doors, the happiest place on earth, right? And they go in there, and the moment they enter those gates, just picture their kids take off running. They sprint into the park. Not only do they leave their parents behind, but they start looking for a family that looks like they're having more fun, and they're going to join them all day. Right? So this time designed to be fun as a family is now destroyed by a desire to replace that family with something that looks better. Like, this is what we do. This is our battle. This is our struggle. And think about the fact that it's an internal struggle, not an external one. Like, we're tempted to replace God with things God has made. And here's the really bad news. I'm sorry to break it to you. You will battle this your entire life. Noah is 600 years old at this point. We sort of hope temptation will go away as we get older. It does not. It just changes. The idols do not disappear. Now, by God's grace, we can learn to flee idolatry as we grow in our love for God, but we've got to be vigilant to fight against idolatry until the day where we see Jesus face to face. So this is why you don't put your hope in your circumstances, because even when they change, we still struggle with this idolatrous use of what God has made. But here's a second reason. Reason number 2, no matter our circumstances, we still mistreat other people. So what exactly happened between Ham and Noah? We really don't know. The language is vague and it's probably euphemistic. At a minimum, we see Ham violates God's command to honor his father and mother. Clearly, he's not honoring his father, and we see this in contrast to the way his brothers respond. But it's possible, even likely, that there's something sexually immoral being described here. Because in Leviticus 18, he's describing the practice of the Canaanites. These are Ham's descendants, and he uses very similar language and terminology to describe incestuous relationships. But the point is less for us to define exactly what happened, but to see this. Notice how Ham behaves like Cain. Right? He harms those he should love. What God told Eve would happen in Genesis 3, that family relationships would get really, really hard because of sin. It happens. Intimacy is replaced with enmity, harm instead of help, violation in place of compassion. Every single relationship you have right now is impacted by your sin. This is so true, we don't even realize how true this is. Because we don't have a single relationship that is unaffected by sin. Like, it's hard for us to even imagine what relationships could be like apart from sin. And that's why changing circumstances is never enough. It's like the person who leaves a church because they're going to find the perfect church. Guess what happens when you or I walk into a church? It's no longer perfect. Right? We bring our sin with us, and our sin comes out in all the sinful ways that we think and relate to other people. Here's the ultimate proof that humans will mistreat each other even in the best circumstances. Ready? Newlyweds fight on their honeymoon. I know you didn't, my wife and I didn't, but if you ask around, some do. Right? So if a honeymoon isn't perfectly peaceful, then what hope is there? Changing circumstances don't change the heart. Here's the third reason for Noah's life not to place all our hope in changing circumstances. No matter our circumstances, we still die. Noah's story ends the same way as those before him and those after him. The same way yours will end, and so will mine. Look at verse 29. So Noah's life lasted 950 years. Okay, yours may not end that way. But here's the next part. Then he died. So I recently read a statement by one author that I thought, this is indisputable. Here's what he wrote. No one gets out of life alive. No one gets out of life alive. And he continued, no matter how young and healthy we may be, no matter how successful we've been so far, no matter how well things may have fallen into place for us, we've all got a lot of death in our future. It's sad, but it's true. Why would we hope in our circumstances if changing our circumstances doesn't keep us from dying? While it might be more comfortable to die wearing a cashmere robe, lying on Egyptian cotton sheets in our sleep number bed, is it really any different than collapsing on a cold linoleum floor at a convenience store? And no matter where you are when you expire, you're still dead. 950 years of life extinguished like a birthday candle. So I've got to ask you, are you putting your hope in your circumstances, particularly a change? Do you find yourself constantly disappointed because things around you haven't improved? Or worse yet, has your situation actually improved, and yet you're still responding sinfully? Now, let me offer one clarification. Circumstances are not what is most important, but they are not unimportant. They are not strong enough to support your deepest hope, but they are strong enough to impact your life. So there are many times when wisdom would teach us to address our circumstances. Think about Psalm 1, verse 1. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the mocker. So if you find yourself in that spot, leave. Right? Change your circumstances. But don't think that just changing your circumstances guarantees anything. Right? We should address our circumstances, but we must not put our ultimate hope in those circumstances. So if we can't put our hope in changing circumstances, where can we put our hope? And here's lesson number 2. Put your hope in God's promises. Put your hope in God's promises. So before we learn about Noah's sinful behavior and Ham's wicked choice, we're told about Noah's sons. And then immediately following that account of his sin, we find a list of nations, a genealogy that comes from these sons in chapter 10. But look at verse 18 with me first. Genesis 9. Noah's sons who came out of the ark were Shem, Ham, and Japheth. Ham was the father of Canaan. These 3 were Noah's sons, and from them the whole earth was populated. Then in chapter 10, you have a list of names, but you also have a list of nations. In fact, there are 70 nations listed. 70. Those who went through Revelation, we understand that's an important number, right? 7 and 10. That means complete. So it's showing us that every nation comes from these 3 men. So we all share the same DNA. We have all descended from the same men. First Adam, then Noah, which means that we have a shared humanity with all other people, regardless of where we grew up, what language we speak, or what nation we call home. And I think this is important for us to think about for just a moment, because this text has sadly and wrongly been used at times to justify slavery. Some have justified racism in sort of biblical terms by appealing to this text, specifically by the curse placed on Ham's line. And that is a complete misreading of the text. To use it to defend buying and selling human beings. That's not what this text is about, and it denies this reality that we share a common ancestor. that each of us comes from the line of Noah and we bear the image of God. In fact, all of us share Noah's sin problem. This is why we all need to put our hope in God's promises. His promises apply to every person regardless of gender, race, or nationality. Okay, but that's sort of a general statement. Put your hope in God's promises. What specific promises should we hope in? Well, the inclusion of genealogies here is supposed to point us back to Genesis 3, verse 15. That's the promise God made in the garden, the promise from which we said this is the fountain from which all other biblical promises flow. Do you remember what it said? What God said to the serpent in Genesis 3:15? He said this, I will put hostility between you and the woman, and between your offspring and her offspring. He will strike your head, you will strike his heel. Listen, memorize this verse. This promise, Genesis 3:15, has broad enough shoulders to carry you through life and death. There are 3 parts to this promise, and we see them fleshed out in these genealogies. Here's the first part. A son will be born. A son will be born. This is the promise of the Messiah. Every genealogy in the Bible reminds us of this promise, that our hope is not in anything we do, it's in the one that God sends to rescue us. And we see this promise in 2 places in our text. We see it in Noah's blessing on Shem in chapter 9, then we see it in Shem's line at the end of chapter 10. Look at chapter 9, verse 26. Blessed be the Lord, the God of Shem. Let Canaan be Shem's slave. Let God extend Japheth. Let Japheth dwell in the tents of Shem. Let Canaan be Shem's slave. Here's what we see. Blessing and judgment come through Shem's line. The promise of the Messiah continues through his line. That Shem is not the Messiah. He is not the final solution to our problem, but he is the conduit through which the promise will flow. Shem may not appreciate this analogy, but he's a lamp cord. Right? He's not the power and he's not the light, but through him this promise comes. Through him the light flows. Shem cannot save us from our sin. He cannot deliver us from death, but through his line, the Savior will come who will deliver us from sin and death. Now, flip over to chapter 10 and look at verse 21. We see this statement about Shem's descendants, about his line. It says, Shem was the father of all the sons of Eber. The sons of Eber are eventually called the Hebrews. So it's saying the nation of Israel comes from Shem's line. Many generations after Shem, you have a son named Abram who's born, and this promise is repeated and expanded. This promise of Messiah is made again to Abraham. We'll see this in 2 weeks. So the line of Shem is really a continuation of the line of Seth. And it extends to Abraham and then ultimately to Jesus. So here's what we're reminded of here. Put your hope in Jesus. Put your hope in Jesus. But why? Why would we place our hope in Jesus? Because through Jesus, God will not just give us a renewed world. He gives us renewed hearts. That's what we're missing. That's what Noah didn't have. A renewed heart. In fact, this becomes the Old Testament builds to this promise called the New Covenant. And the difference between the old covenants, like the promises made to Noah, and this new covenant is that it says that God will write his law on our very hearts. Our hearts will change. Remember, our biggest problem even after the flood is this. Chapter 8, verse 21 says, the inclination of the human heart is evil from youth onward. That's our problem. And so God promises that through Jesus, he'll come and he'll give us new hearts. That's why Jesus is a better Noah. He doesn't just provide rest from the evil outside us, he provides rest from the evil inside us. So put your hope in the promise of the Son, but also there's a second part to this promise, is the serpent will be defeated. Not only does the Son come, the serpent's defeated. Right? The seed, the Son, crushes the serpent's head. But this is what Genesis 3:15 teaches us. There's this ongoing battle for quite a while between the offspring of the woman and the offspring of the serpent. And the rest of the Bible tells this story until it culminates in Revelation with the final defeat of Satan. So in this curse on Ham's line, we're reminded of this sort of ongoing conflict and ultimately a victory. Look at verse 24, chapter 9. When Noah woke from his drinking and learned that his youngest son had done to him, he said, Canaan is cursed. He'll be the lowest of slaves to his brother. So when Ham sinned, here's what became obvious. He is the offspring of the serpent. And not just him. All who refuse to trust Jesus and follow him are described the same way. So Jesus, one day, is standing, he's talking to the most religious people in his day, and they would be the most religious people in our day too. I mean, these are people who take the law very seriously, who order their lives around obeying all the commands they can find. And Jesus looks at them and says, you are a brood of what? Vipers. What's a viper? It's a serpent. You're the offspring of the serpent. And he goes on to say, your father is the devil, in case they didn't get it. So this conflict between the offspring of the woman and the offspring of the serpent, it's most notably seen in the ongoing battles between Israel and the Canaanites. So you may have noticed that when Noah curses Ham, he doesn't curse Ham directly, he curses his son Canaan. And he does this sort of prophetically to show how these pagan, idolatrous, immoral nations called the Canaanites will constantly fight against God's people. That they will follow the commands of their father, the serpent. They will harm and harass the Hebrews. They'll attempt to keep God's promise of the Messiah from being fulfilled. When I was a kid, there was a TV show called America's Most Wanted, which I think was on Saturday mornings, which is really weird in retrospect. But it was basically a show about like the most wanted criminals in America. Verses 8 through 20 of chapter 10, it reads like a version of Israel's Most Wanted. Because if you're familiar with the Old Testament, you'll recognize a number of these names. Maybe not all of them, but many of them. And you'll notice they're known for their hatred of God's people and their outright rejection of God's law. These are the seed of the serpent attempting to kill the seed of the woman before salvation can come. So here are some of the most familiar names. Here are the most wanted. Verse 10, Babylon. Babylon ends up destroying Jerusalem. Verse 11, Assyria. That nation defeats the northern tribes of Israel and takes them into slavery. Verse 11, Nineveh. This is the city Jonah refused to visit because of their cruelty and violence. Verse 13, the Philistines. Constant battles with Israel. This is where Goliath is from. Verse 16, the Amorites, again, they're constantly in conflict with Israel. Verse 19, Sodom and Gomorrah, destroyed by God for their wickedness. Think about it this way, that if the descendants of Ham had a family reunion, you wouldn't want to attend. Especially if you're a Hebrew. Right? These nations, the offspring of the serpent, are perpetually at war with Israel. And Israel often loses battles to them. Now, what does Noah's prophecy tell us? He tells us that ultimately the seed of the serpent and the serpent himself will be enslaved by Shem, by the Messiah. And we see this in moments throughout the Old Testament where Israel is victorious, so Joshua leads them into the promised land. Some of the judges come up and they win victory. David defeats Goliath. But the ultimate victory doesn't come until the seed of the woman slays the serpent. And this is what we celebrate in the cross, isn't it? We've sung about it today. That the enemy cannot stand against Jesus. And we know that though he has already triumphed over the enemy, the full salvation isn't here. The final victory is still to come. Revelation 20 verse 9 says they, who's the they? It's the offspring, the seed of the serpent. It's the brood of vipers. They come across the breadth of the earth, surrounding the encampment of the saints, the beloved city. Then fire comes down from heaven and consumes them. The devil, the beast, the serpent who deceives them is thrown in the lake of fire. That's what's going to happen. That's what Noah is prophesying. And this is why you don't put your hope in a college degree or a Christmas bonus. Don't put your hope in a pleasant vacation or a potential spouse. Don't put your hope in circumstances changing. You put your hope in the one who crushed the serpent's head and delivers us from sin forever. Which leads to the third part of the promise. Salvation will spread. I believe Japheth is a middle child. Because if you notice, he's sort of overlooked, unloved, forgotten, just tags along. Birthdays are forgotten, I'm sure. I also am a middle child, if you didn't gather that. But in all this, he's not mentioned much. You get into chapter 10, he's got a short little section of his genealogy. We do know in chapter 9, verse 27, that He's going to receive blessing through his relationship with Shem. But look at chapter 10, verse 5, and see how his descendants are described. It says this, the peoples of the coasts and islands spread out into their lands according to their clans and their nations, each with its own language. That happens after the Tower of Babel. We'll look at that next week. But basically it says Japheth's lines, they head to the edges of the map. Right? They spread out around the world, and they don't seem to have much of a role in this ongoing conflict between the Shem's line, the seed, and Ham's line, the serpent. But that doesn't mean they're forgotten. One of the great Psalms is Psalm 72, and it describes the Messiah's reign. So when Shem's line culminates in Jesus Christ. And it says this, Psalm 72, verse 8, may he, that's the Messiah, rule from sea to sea and from the Euphrates to the ends of the earth. May the kings of Tarshish, look at chapter 10, verse 4, right in the middle there. See Tarshish? Now in verse 5, this is how Psalm 72 continues. May the kings of Tarshish and the coasts and islands bring tribute. Let all kings bow in homage to him. All nations serve him. So in the future, when Shem's line produces the son who defeats the serpent, his reign extends to all nations, and the sons of Japheth will worship him. Japheth's line is not forgotten, because in the tents of Shem, in the family of Jesus, they find blessing. You know, it's easy for us to trace our line, your line, my line, all the way back to Noah. Right? We all can say, like, yep, way back there is Noah. But it gets really hard to trace from there. If you put the Middle East at the center of a map, at least right now we're on the edges. Like, we're a long way from there. We're on the part of the map that back then it would have just sort of faded out. Maybe there's a little sea monster drawn in. We don't know what happens as the edge of the earth. But we are not so far away that God's hand can't reach us. That God sends the news of salvation to the islands and the coast so that people from every tribe, tongue, and nation can worship him and enjoy his salvation. So no matter who you are, no matter where you came from, you can be saved through Jesus Christ. Now maybe there's a reason you think you can't be saved. Maybe you say, yeah, but my sin is too great. My shame is too deep. My family background is too broken. I want you to hear one more verse. It's found in Isaiah 11. Isaiah 11 is a beautiful prophecy about the reign of Christ. And it says that when Jesus establishes his final kingdom, the earth will be full of the knowledge of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. How glorious will that be? But then this is what will happen. Isaiah 11, verse 11. On that day, the Lord will extend his hand a second time to recover the remnant of his people who survive from Assyria, Egypt, Pathros, Cush, Elam, Shinar, Hamath, and the coasts and islands of the west. Now, do you recognize any of those names? They come from the line of Ham. God is going to save people from those cities and nations. Do you see the grace? Even those under the curse of sin will be spared judgment through the work of Jesus. I mean, isn't this glorious? Jesus offers his enemies salvation. Do you think that you're too sinful for God to save? There is no possibility that your sin is greater than his grace. I want you to imagine you were diagnosed with congestive heart failure. Right, so your heart function is steadily decreasing. No way to fix it. One day, as you lay in your hospital bed, exhausted, stressed, struggling to breathe, a man enters your room and he offers you a choice. Option number one, he will take you out of this small hospital room and he will place you into a beautiful house. In that house, there will be the top cardiologists and nurses who are available 24 hours a day just for you. There'll also be a private chef. You can stop eating that hospital food. The food will be designed it'll taste wonderful. It'll be exactly what you need. Every potential comfort, every luxury, everything you need to live out your days as your heart fails in comfort, he's going to provide it for you. Nothing will be withheld from you. That's option number one. Here's option number two. You could have a heart transplant. It will be really, really painful. The recovery will be brutal. It'll probably be more painful than anything you've experienced, but eventually, once the healing takes place, you'll have a functioning heart. Option one, option two. Which option do you choose? Is there even a choice? Why would anyone choose comfort over health, luxury over life? Friends, we face this choice every day, and we struggle to make the right decision. Would I choose right now, if God gave me the option, more comfortable circumstances, or would I choose a changed heart? Let's be honest for just a minute. God gave you one thing. Would it be to change something around you or change something in you? I think we opt for the less radical and the less painful procedure. We would rather manage our pain than turn to Jesus for healing. So where's your hope? Are you hoping to fix everything broken around you, or are you trusting in Jesus to fix what's broken inside you? Join me in prayer.